Benedicite Dominus, and welcome to question 146 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is abstinence, and I am Dr. Thibault. So we are dealing with a very short question this time. We are dealing with abstinence, which is one of the subjective parts of temperance. Like different species, animal species like ox or lion, they are a part of the family of animal. Abstinence, sobriety, and chastity are part of the family of temperance. So we are looking first here at abstinence. So abstinence is dealing primarily with the entrenchment of food. Entrenchment is to either not have or to reduce significantly one's intake of food. Sobriety will then deal with alcohol, and chastity will deal with the sexual desires. So we're dealing with desires of the flesh, things which are pleasurable, but also somewhat necessary. So particularly food. Some people do go without alcohol or sex, but they don't really go without food. That's one of those necessities. So is abstinence a virtue, which is Article 1. And you can look at it in two ways. One is re-entrenchment of food, absolutely. In that regard, St. Thomas says, no, it's not a virtue, a particular virtue. If a person has an eating disorder, that's not a virtue. If a person just stops eating food, that's not a virtuous act of itself. Now, if a person's on a diet, it's a little bit in between. It doesn't have to be simply for spiritual purposes, but it can't just be that you're just not going to eat food anymore. That doesn't work. That's not a virtue. Now, if one abstains with knowledge, this idea St. Thomas takes from the letter of St. Peter, if absence with knowledge, which means it's regulated by reason, then yes, it is a virtue. So in this way, why would somebody abstain from food using reason? Well, one would be just in terms of health. That would be one, the diet. If you go to a restaurant and you order an appetizer and 5 drinks and a big meal and then a big dessert, and you do this regularly, you will probably get unhealthy, right? We have a problem with heart disease and cholesterol and strokes and all these other health-related issues, diabetes, because of people, various reasons. But one of the reasons why would be not eating in the proper proportions, right? Eating in the proper way, not eating with reason in mind, right? How do you eat with reason? Well, when you're full, stop, right? That would be one thing that would be reasonable. And we know how many calories people need to eat on a daily basis in order to be healthy. If you eat twice as many, that would be unhealthy. Even if you say you were still hungry, it would be twice as many because it defies what reason dictates. Now, another reason would be out of, as St. Thomas points out, if one's a soldier, you might have to abstain because of battle, or an athlete because of competition, or you might do it for spiritual reasons, out of contemplation or out of penance. Those would also be applied to reason. And lastly, St. Thomas points out that even if you want to judge yourself on how you are with this, he says that, just abstaining from eating food is not virtuous of itself. Eat, no virtue. Don't eat, no virtue. In some ways, it doesn't really matter what goes into the body in that way. Jesus himself says it's not what goes into the body, but it's what comes out of it that makes one unclean. But if you want to judge, if you're building character in that regard in terms of abstinence, see what happens when you can't eat. Right? When you are hungry, because whatever, you're on a trip or necessary situation you can't get around. In that situation, do you go without food uncomplainingly, or are you complaining all the time that, oh, I'm so hungry, I gotta eat? If you are complaining about it, or you're not willing to do it readily, then that might be a desire that could be curbed through temperance, through abstinence. Second article, only 2 articles again. Second article is dealing with, is abstinence a special virtue? Now, St. Thomas has so many definitions for what constitutes a special virtue. Nearly every time we get a special virtue, we get another aspect of what it means to be a special virtue. Somebody wanted to do something interesting, they could compile all of his definitions of a special virtue so that we know what exactly it is. St. Thomas says, whenever we find a special motive why a passion departs from the good of reason, there is need of a special virtue. So if there's a special motive why the passions depart. So in this one, this special reason would be gluttony. So we're dealing with one of the 7 deadly sins. So because we're dealing with a special deadly sin and that special motive why the passions departs from good is in regards to food, right? So it's not in regards to all things, but in regards to food abstinence. It's specific in that regard, therefore it is a special virtue. So this is a very short section. Abstinence is a virtue, and it is a special virtue. It's related to the moderation of the pleasures of food. Next we will get into drink and parts, and even the parts of abstinence which go into fasting, which is in much greater depth than the section on abstinence, and then chastity, which also has many different aspects.